All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So once again, my name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar, and I want to thank you for joining me and David today for Policy Pitfalls, Common Mistakes in NIST and CMMC Compliance and How to Avoid Them. Now, when we talk about policies, we're talking about building your policies for NIST 800-171 with Exostar SaaS application Policy Pro. If you'd like to, there is a free trial available for you. It's at the URL you see here on the screen. David's going to be showing a demonstration today of Policy Pro. And if you'd like to follow along as he does that, feel free to go to the URL and start your free trial. So before we dive into the formal presentation, just want to cover a few housekeeping details. So today's session is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. That does include Q&A. Now, you're going to be muted during today's presentation. However, we did receive a number of questions submitted prior to today's session. So we'll be answering those questions at the end. While David is doing his presentation, I'll try and answer any questions that come over chat at that time. If we do have an outage during today's session, just wait for a minute and try to reconnect. You can do that in a couple of different ways. You can just try and refresh your screen, and that should bring you back into the presentation where we are at that time. You can also use that URL that you received prior to today's session to come back in and also restart the session at that time. Now, if one of the questions you're going to ask is, will I receive a copy of today's presentation and or a recording, the answer is yes. So you will receive a PDF copy of the slides we're using today. And then along with that email follow-up, there'll also be a link to today's recording. If at any time you'd like to speak with one of our CMMC experts, you can also reach out to us a couple of different ways. You can email us at cmmc-team@exostar.com, or you can come to our website, www.exostar.com. There's a question feature on every page, so you can certainly open that form and submit a question to us that way as well. So with that, let's go ahead and start today's session. So as I mentioned, my name's Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar, and I'm joined on today's presentation by David Rowe of ISMS. David, you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is David Rowe. I'm the Business Development Manager here, and I'll be showing you a demo of the platform today.
Great. So before I turn it over to David for the demonstration of Policy Pro, I want to do a couple of different things. I want to level set everybody of where we are in the CMMC process, and then also just ensure that everyone knows kind of what you need to gather as you start to build out that system security plan and how you define that overall system. So exciting news this month on the CMMC front. So the final rule, the Title 48 CFR, was published in the Federal Registry. That published on the 10th of September. And what that means is you should start to see the formal implementation of phase 1 of the program start on November 10th of 2025. What that means is that's the soonest that CMMC will start to appear in contracts. Hopefully, as you know, the 32 CFR, and CFR stands for the Code of Federal Regulations. What that did is that defined the CMMC program. It put in the different levels. It defined key terminology that you see on there on the left, the cloud service providers and the external service providers and the requirements that they need to fulfill to be part of your overall system security plan. It defines that we're moving away from that self-attestation model to a third-party assessment model for certain of these CMMC levels. Now, just to level set everybody, these are those 3 CMMC levels. Level 1, which is what the majority of the defense industrial base falls under, 63% of the organizations out there won't be receiving controlled unclassified information as part of their contract. But because they will be receiving contract information, FCI, they are required to safeguard that information, and there are 15 requirements around that. Now, when you see level 1, you'll often see some people with 15 and some people with 17. The reason there is that difference, there are 15 requirements. However, if you map those 15 requirements to NIST 800-171, there are 17 controls that those 15 requirements fall under. So that's why you see those two numbers. But I'm going to go with what the DoD has on their website, and that's where I grabbed this graphic from. And that's those 15 requirements. These are self-assessed and annually affirmed that you do these things. Now, when we get to level 2, that's when we start to see controlled unclassified information provided to contractors and subcontractors as part of that contract requirements. What that means is you need to safeguard that information in accordance with NIST 800-171 R2. And that has 110 requirements. And this is where we bifurcate, and right, so there are two different kinds of paths. For a small number of organizations, they're going to be allowed to self-assess that they do those 110 controls, right? That's less than 2% of the organizations out there. And please be aware that it's going to be determined by the contracting officer. They're the ones who get to decide if this particular contract will allow a self-assessment or will require that certified third-party assessment organization to do that. That second set, those requiring that C3PAO, that's that certified third-party assessment organization, to assess how they have implemented those 110 controls and to validate that they do all 110. That's a certification that needs to take place once every 3 years. You'll also need to annually affirm that you still do those things. And then if you're one of those few organizations that will be deemed to be level 3, then you've got those 110 requirements, an additional 24 requirements from NIST SP 800-172. So, and that will also require a third-party assessment, but that third party is going to be DIBCAC. DIBCAC is the audit agency within the Department of Defense that does it for the defense industrial base. That's the DIB in DIBCAC. All of these must be annually affirmed by a senior company official. And when the assessors come out, if they find that you haven't implemented certain controls, it can be okay, but there are only a few of those controls. There are those controls that are worth 1 point, and it's only certain of those controls that can still be open. If they are, then you can open a POAM, a plan of action and milestones to address that, and you have 180 days to close that POAM. So when CMMC gets implemented, right, from November 10th of 2025, that's going to start the phase 1 implementation. This implementation schedule is taken straight from the DoD's website. Cut and pasted this graphic from there. The link to that website's also here on the page. So that phase 1 is going to be the first year. It's expected that that phase 1 is going to only require self-assessments for level 1 and level 2. After that first year, so that's 11/10 of 2026, that's when you'll start to see level 2 certification be required with that certified third-party assessment organization appear in contracts. Phase 3, which will be after 2 years, that's when you'll start to see that requirement for level 3 certification. And then phase 4 is the full implementation of the program. Now, please take into account that final caveat, that's the blue bar here on the page, where the DoD can decide to implement requirements earlier based on the criticality or the sensitivity of particular contracts. All right, so with CMMC coming very soon, please be aware of things that you may have to do today to fulfill your contractual requirements, right? There have been clauses about requiring you to meet 800-171 requirements if you have controlled unclassified information for a number of years. So please check your contracts, make sure you're in compliance with them. If you've got a DFARS clause 252.204/7012, that's the clause that says if I receive controlled unclassified information, I need to store, process, and transmit in accordance with NIST 800-171. 7019 is the clause that says, okay, I receive CUI, I'm doing it within, or I safeguard it in accordance with NIST 800-171, and I do a self-assessment. You're required to do a self-assessment and score yourself based on that self-assessment. You use the NIST 800-171A, that's the assessment guide, to create that score. That assessment guide provides a point value for all 110 controls. So, and they're weighted differently based on a control. They're either worth 1, 3, or 5 points, -1, -3, or -5. So your score ranges from a -203 to 110. And then you're supposed to take that score and enter it into the DoD's SPRS system, Supplier Performance Risk System. This is a system that only the DoD has access to, and it provides an overall risk assessment of the different DIB suppliers out there. And one of the values that's considered of your overall risk score, one of those is how you secure controlled unclassified information, and that is your score that you do after, or you provide after you do your self-assessment. So if you've got contracts with those clauses in there, you should be doing these things today. Now, all of these things are all about controlled unclassified information or federal contract information. Now, when we start to define how we're going to determine what the scope is of our systems that secure or store, process, or transmit controlled unclassified information, this is what's going to determine the extent of that overall system. It's going to determine whether or not we need to put all of these controls in place across our entire organization, or if we set up what's called an enclave, because we can restrict access to this information only to certain people, processes, and tools. And then we put those controls around this particular enclave. But the way you do that and determine the scope of the overall system is to actually follow that data throughout your system. And here's one way to do that. It is to create that flow diagram. This is called a turtle diagram. Hopefully that's self-evident why, right? So what this tracks is how CUI comes into the company, where we put it, who in the organization actually may interact with that information, what systems might do that, how do they access it, what kind of processes do we have around it, so how are we storing, processing, how are we transmitting that information, how are we saving it, etc. And then when that contract ends, how do we dispose of that information? And this will help you define that overall scope, because this is going to tell you the people, the processes, and the systems that store, process, or transmit that controlled unclassified information. This should be one of the key elements that you have when you go to your C3PAO and you ask them to assess your 110 controls. They're going to ask you for your data flow diagrams and your network diagrams so they understand the scope of the overall assessment. And then you're going to build the policies that you have in place for your NIST 800-171 around that particular enclave or across your entire organization. You're also going to want to diagram that system. You want to create a network diagram or a process flow diagram, because even though we often think only about our computer systems and applications that might store, process, or transmit CUI, many of you may also have physical systems, physical controls, physical storage devices, file cabinets, etc., where these drawings are stored, where people access them, how people access them, what rooms they're allowed in, etc. And all of those things go into this overall diagram of the system. And those things are classified as, as one of the kinds of items that you see here. Are they a CUI asset? Are we storing or processing or transmitting CUI from this particular asset? Is it a file cabinet where we're storing it? Is it a computer where we're doing a CAD CAM drawing or enhancing or building a drawing from scratch? Are we coding something up, etc.? Is it a system where we're deploying code to, right? A server, a virtual machine, etc.? Is this a security protection asset? Is this a firewall that we have at our edge? Is it a door that we have a lock on, and things like that? Do I have contractors as part of my CUI data flow? And these contractors could be staff augmentation people who are part of the overall service delivery that I have. They could be employees of my managed service provider that are doing maintenance on my IT systems or providing me outsourced IT services around a particular thing. Are they a specialized asset like an IoT device that's either embedded in a system, right? I may have monitors, I may have machines that are programmed to do something. Or is this an asset that might be in my plant, but it actually doesn't touch the CUI? It's not involved in the flow at all. It is a workstation that is not part of the CUI data flow, and which no one who's part of that CUI data flow has access to or logs on and then touches it, etc. So those kinds of things are also part of this. So these diagrams, both the data flow diagram and the network diagrams, those build out the, if you will, the representation of your overall system, because that system is what's going to be actually evaluated when those third parties come on site to check whether or not you're compliant. And obviously, one of those things they're going to check are your overall policies that govern those 14 control families. Right? There are 110 individual controls within NIST 800-171, but those are broken out into 14 control families, and that's what you're going to build your policies around. It's how do we control access to systems? How do we train our individuals and our organization to do these things? How do we ensure that we have all these systems up to date and we're keeping the systems up to date? And how do I review my policies and procedures? How often do I do that? How often do I augment them, change them, etc.? How often do we review those? All of those are part of your overall system security plan, and all of those are tied back to your overall policies and how you govern that. Now, when you're building that system security plan, please ensure that you label things clearly for those assessors. And what I mean by that is, call them out by the same terms that are used in NIST 800-171. use those control families and those control numbers so they're clearly identified for the assessors that this maps to this and this kind of thing maps to this, because there are a lot of standards out there, right? You may be using like an ISO standard or something like that. You may already have a number of policies and procedures written for these other kind of standards that you've done before. And that's fine, that's great. But just make sure you clearly label that hey, we're using this standard for ISO whatever, and we're using this for NIST 800-171 1.3.1. And so when the assessors come on site, they know which one they're looking at, and they know exactly how it maps onto that overall system security plan. So for an easy way to start with these policies, to both give you a template on how you might want to build that policy or write that policy, because that's what Policy Pro is going to do. It's going to provide you templates for each of those 14 control families, show you where you need to edit, cut, paste, etc., and change these so they fit your own system. Because these templates need to be customized to fit your organization and the things you have in place to actually do those things. You can then take these policies and run them through the AI engine to give you an overall score and feedback on how these policies are, what additional items might need to be changed, what might need to be added. Is this of sufficient length to cover these things? All of these kinds of things come as part of the Policy Pro package. And so to show you how that actually works, I'm going to turn it over to David.
Thanks, Kevin. All right, so as Kevin mentioned, Policy Pro is a SaaS-based platform designed to help you and your organization get compliant around the various requirements that your organization faces as you do business either directly with DoD or as subcontractors. Regardless of where your organization is in your cybersecurity journey, maybe you're just kind of getting started out. You need to figure out exactly what policies are, how to build them, and the other documentation that comes along with that process. Or maybe your organization is further along and you already have all of your existing policies and procedures in place. Regardless, the platform can guide you through that entire process in order to actually meet those requirements, including the NIST 800-171 Revision 2, which maps directly to the CMMC 2.0. We'll start off using our policy builder tool here, and this is really the first step in that journey, especially if you don't have all of those policies in place. In today's demonstration, we'll be walking through a CMMC 2.0 Level 2 example. So as you can see here on the left-hand side, we've got the 14 different policy family domains, starting from access control all the way down to system and information integrity. The first time through on the platform, you'll receive this pop-up here, which is a brief explanation of what policies are, as well as some of the other documents you should have in preparation for CMMC. So some of those other documents include the gap assessment, the risk register, the POAM, which is those plan of actions and milestones, as well as the SSP, your system security plan. As Kevin mentioned, the SSP is an important aspect of CMMC compliance, and if you don't have those documents, we do provide some simple templates here for you to download. You can select the hyperlink and that'll take you to the download. Otherwise, if you need some further assistance on any of these other documents, there's a companion product called Certification Assistant, and Kevin will elaborate on that a little bit after this demo here. So once you've closed out of this page, you'll be taken to the Prepare, Gather, and Consult page. This is everything you'll need to prepare prior to even getting started with the policies themselves. For example, it could include things like gathering your organization's documents, records, and other materials related to these various access control topics. Additionally, who you may want to consult with, whether they are internal or external stakeholders. For example, it could include people like your network administrator, head of IT, or CISO, and then any sort of outside contractor if you do utilize them. So those would include your MSPs, your MSSPs, and your IT consultants. Once you have all of that prepared, you'll then go to the policy template. And all of our policy templates are kind of structured out in a standard way in terms of the header here, which includes your organization name, the department or departments this policy falls under, the issue date for when you finalized the policy, approved by, and the tracking number. The tracking number can be used in a number of ways. However, the most common way to use it is to keep track of the version number of your policy. So as you work on revisions and updates, whether it's because you're periodically updating them or because the standard itself has changed, you want to make sure to keep track through the tracking number and version number. The other sections include the purpose, the scope, and the individual practices. So for level 2, we're talking about 110 different practices associated with those 14 policy domains. And we break out each practice individually here. And there's a couple key pieces of information that you'll use prior to even starting on the policies themselves. So underneath the practice, you'll see the practice number. In this case, it's 3.1.1. That's the control ID, and it's also mapped directly back to all the NIST 800-171 revision 2 controls. Next to that is the practice description. In this case, it's about limiting information system access to authorized users. And then finally, underneath that are going to be the guidelines. The guidelines will help you understand what sort of information is typically included in that practice section, as well as kind of in plain English, explain what that particular practice is about. Once you're ready to begin, you'll click on this pencil icon here, and that's going to bring up our policy template for 3.1.1. We can see that this policy is going to be about our organization's account creation, work from home, and bring your own device policy. A couple notes as you're working through these policy documents. One, ensure you're reading through the entirety of the policy template. What's written here should really reflect what your organization has implemented or what your organization plans to implement in the future based off your policies. Additionally, there's certain sections you want to pay particular attention to as you're working through these in order to customize it to, again, fit your actual implementations. An example of that is here in the first paragraph where it talks about all account creations will be submitted by the requesting department manager to the IT support email address for completion using the account request ticketing system or other process. There, depending on whether or not you are utilizing a ticketing system, if you are, whatever system that is, you'll fill in. And then if you are not utilizing a ticketing system, then whatever other process it is you're using to handle those account creation requests and account creations, that's what you want to fill in that section there. Um, every every kind of section will have those customization sections, and there might be multiple within each section. So again, just make sure you're reading through each section carefully. You can also add additional users, so whether they are policy stakeholders, whether they're senior officials in your organization, or maybe even external to your organization, for an example, an MSP, you can add them to the platform and collaborate on your policies together. So you can use things like comments and mentions and a couple other features here in Policy Builder in order to effectively collaborate together and build out these policies. Any changes you make, you want to make sure to click on the Save button, and that's going to timestamp it as well as who the user was that last made the change. It'll also keep a track of all of your changes as well through version history. So if you select on version history, you can see any of your previous versions of your policy documents. You can go back if you need to for whatever reason and go back to an older version. You can also reset it back to the original template as well. Once you've kind of gone through this process, you're going to then click on this export button here on the bottom, and that's going to do a couple things. It's going to combine all of those sections I mentioned previously, so the header, the purpose, the scope, and the individual practices, into a single access control document that will then be saved to your local drive. It's important for a couple different reasons. One, I always recommend that people have their policies in a couple different media formats, including obviously locally, as well as it's an important final step prior to the next feature of the platform. So once you've done that, you've kind of completed your first policy here. Again, there are 14 different policy families for level 2, but we'll move on to policy assessment. Policy assessment is where you're going to assess and analyze your documentation. And as Kevin mentioned before, it doesn't necessarily have to be policies created using our policy builder. Maybe you have existing documentation for other standards, for example, in ISO 27001, or again, any other cybersecurity related policy that might be relevant to access control. We'll go ahead and upload an access control policy here. And again, you can upload either a specific access control policy that you created for CMMC, or even multiple other documents. For example, maybe you have a few other documents that might be relevant to this. For example, if I scroll up here, you might have an acceptable use policy, you might have an account creation policy. You can upload multiple documents as well, and you'll be able to analyze and assess those documents against the requirements of CMMC 2.0. Next step will be to click on this detailed scorecard here, and we assess your documents both at a high level as well as a granular level. At the high level here, you can see that this overall document appears relevant in size, scope, and organizational customization. The overall assessment is comprised of 3 different metrics: the relevance, which is how many key terms or phrases are included in your policy. The higher that is, the higher the relevance, and therefore overall assessment will be. The model similarity compares the policy you've uploaded to our model documents, and we do that to ensure that it's been appropriately customized to fit your organization, as well as ensuring it's covering everything it needs to cover. Finally, the word count is simply to ensure we have enough context surrounding those key terms to accurately assess your documentation. So if you see that word count as too low, chances are the overall assessment and overall score might not necessarily be an accurate reflection of how your policies are doing. In terms of the overall score, here you can see it's a 70.3% for the document I've uploaded. And our overall scoring is not like an academic score, meaning 90% as an A, 80% as a B. It's a relevant scoring system. So anything above a 50% shows a relevant document. And I'll talk a little bit later on in the demo about how you utilize the overall score to gauge how your policies are currently doing, as well as how your policies are improving over time. So that's kind of everything at the high level, but we also provide some granular feedback as well in terms of what it is you're exactly missing in your document and how you can improve it. And we do that through our key elements not included, or KENNY for short. And we have 2 different types of KENNYs, control KENNYs as well as general KENNYs. My first example of a control KENNY is CUI non-public information. That is that key term or phrase that's missing in my document that I should be looking to incorporate. And we can see some additional information underneath that, which is the actual practice that it's associated with. In this case, it's 3.1.22. And the discussion requirements come directly from CMMC. So it's an easy way to find out exactly what 3.1.22 is discussing, and so you don't have to flip back and forth between the platform and the standard to figure out exactly what's being required under that particular practice. The documents for examination are going to be other sorts of documents, records, or materials that your organization might have that can help you adjust that control kenny. Some examples here might be a security awareness training record or system audit log. In addition, the documents for examination can be utilized as artifacts or evidence. So one of the key aspects of passing an audit is being able to actually prove the things that you say you're doing, and the things you're saying you're doing are based off your policies. And so once you've actually gone ahead and incorporated it into your policy, you've implemented it, these other documents for examination are going to act as evidence to show proof that you are doing those various activities. The general policy kenny terms are very similar in the sense that there are also key terms and phrases that are missing in my document. However, you'll notice there's no collapse all, expand all button there with the additional information. And the reason for that is these are not tied to a specific practice. They're more generic to the policy domain, in this case, an access control policy. You can also export these results into a PDF if you want to save them locally or just share with others who aren't on the platform. You can do that as well. One last feature I want to talk about here in policy assessment is this management approval feature. So I'll go ahead and click management approved, and we can discuss it further in the dashboard. The dashboard is where you'll come to see all your progress and work throughout the platform, whether you're creating policies in Policy Builder or assessing policies in Policy Assessment. All of that work is going to be reflected here in the dashboard. Additionally, my latest management approved policy is shown here in the green, as well as who the user was and when they approved it. So it's a great way to keep track and ensure that everyone in the organization is following the same most up-to-date version of your policy, as well as one of the requirements that a senior official is, or whoever is in charge of your CMMC program, is the one and has actually signed off on your policies. And they're ultimately the ones who are responsible to ensure that your organization is following CMMC. So a great way to keep track of that is through this management approval feature, as well as showing any previously management approved policies. Again, being able to keep track as well as have evidence of the fact that you are periodically reviewing and periodically updating your policies. You cannot do that all through Policy Pro. You'll also notice all of those other metrics I mentioned previously, including the overall metrics, the kennys, and the overall score. So as you incorporate those kennys into your documentation, you'll notice those kenny scores going down and your overall score going up. Use the overall score to gauge if it's above a 50%. If it's below a 50%, you know that the document or documents you've uploaded are not particularly relevant to CMMC and that you probably need to do a lot of work in terms of incorporating the kennys and ensure that you are addressing all 110 controls within your documents. If at any time you need some additional assistance or help, you can always come to the reference library, which contains various resources and links across the web, mostly directly from the NIST Institute, but it's a great way to quickly get the information you need on various topics as you're working on either building out your policy or revising your policy documents. We also have CMMC level 1, CMMC 2.0 level 1 available as well. So if you select that button there, that's going to swap the policy domains as well as the controls. So you'll notice these 6 different policy families for level 1. Hopefully this has been a helpful overview about how to utilize Policy Pro in your organization and to quickly and effectively build out these policies and assess them against the standard itself. And it's also a great way to ensure that you're building out policies that will help you out with your CMMC audits in the future. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin now, who's got a couple finishing items as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Great. Thanks so much, David. All right, everybody. So Policy Pro is one of Exostar's applications within our CMMC Ready suite. Its companion applications are also SaaS applications. One of those is our Certification Assistant. Certification Assistant is an application that allows you to manage your overall CMMC program. So it allows you to upload that information about your enclave or your system, if you will, define that system, go through each of those 110 controls, put in your implementation statements, gather your evidence around how you're actually doing what you just said you were going to do, allow you to periodically review those and keep records of you doing that. If you don't have a control implemented, it will open a POAM against that particular control. And so, as I mentioned, it really just lets you manage that overall program. If you need a place to store, process, or transmit CUI, if you're looking for an enclave solution, that is our Exostar Managed Microsoft 365. This is a Teams environment up in Microsoft's Azure GCC High environment, stood up and managed by Exostar, with an Exostar application embedded within it that puts the guardrails within that team system that allows us to enforce and share 85 of those 110 controls within that enclave. It also has additional features which allow you to manage that enclave for you and your organization. And this enclave is managed and supported by Exostar. If you're looking for a person to come in and do your assessment, if you're looking for a partner to do a readiness assessment or a mock assessment before you bring in the third party, Exostar has a number of partner organizations that can really help you wherever you are in that particular process. Those organizations often use those Exostar applications that are part of that CMMC Ready suite to deliver the overall CMMC solution. This can be packaged all together as one solution, or you can really just utilize that particular component that you need based on where you are in your overall journey. Now, as I mentioned, we did get some questions, so I'm going to cover those now. We're getting some questions in chats during the session as well. My colleague Joey and I have answered those as they've come in. So number one, is there a standard format that is required on how the policy should be prepared? There really isn't any guide that says, oh, it must be in this particular format. What I would just highly encourage you to do is clearly label which control this, this statement or this policy is addressing, especially if you use policies for multiple kinds of requirements. As I mentioned, in my talk, if you're using some standards that you also developed for things like ISO or HIPAA or just privacy statements and things like that you're utilizing, just make sure you clearly label those things that are specifically addressing the NIST 800-171 policy. So number two, we create technical documents with hundreds of images. How are these documents to be marked as CUI? Do all images need to be marked in each page of the technical document? These are HTML documents. So there are clear guidelines on how to label particular documents available from the DoD. There is a marking guide, a CUI marking guide and things like that that you can download. What those things typically boil down to is the documents themselves do need to be, have standard marking. So it should be the document itself, not necessarily the individual images. However, you may, since you're using HTML, you may want to use tags embedded within the HTML to label the images as CUI as well, since, as you know, with HTML, you can, download images and things like that. So you may want to put those tags directly within the HTML code as well. So number three, how best to collect evidence to prove ongoing things that are brand new and never done before or don't apply. So for example, tabletop exercises. We've never done these before. And other controls about physical security if we don't necessarily have an office. Everyone is remote, there is no office. So for controls that you plan on implementing, like tabletop exercises, but maybe you haven't done it yet. So you may have as part of your control, our organization conducts a tabletop notification exercise once every quarter. If you haven't done that yet, I would just make sure it's on the calendar and that those people who are there, or who are part of that exercise, have it on their calendar as well. And that then when you come to do that exercise, you document that you've done it, who participated, and the results of it. That provides that evidence that you're doing those things that you say you're doing. Now, for physical security, for people who are remote, you should have certain policies in place for remote employees that are part of that CUI data flow. For example, you may not allow them, or you may have a policy that doesn't allow them to print CUI or store CUI locally if they're remote. But if you allow them to, then you should also have certain things in place that allow you, or that explain to them how they need to secure it, that they actually do those things. And you may want to gather evidence that they actually do that. You may have a right to inspect or something like that as part of your overall policy. So those are the kinds of things you may have to do for remote employees if you do allow them to take home CUI or store CUI locally in a home office, things like that. So how important is it to carry out both self-assessment followed by a gap assessment before inviting the external auditors? So when I see MSPs today, and I talk to a lot of them, there are these various kinds of assessment. There is a gap assessment. So what don't I have in place that I need to have in place? There are mock assessments. Hey, come in and treat me just like you would if you were assessing me as a C3PAO. And then obviously there's that C3PAO assessment. Now, there's no particular order you should do these things. You certainly should always, and I'm sorry, but what it really boils down to is how comfortable are you that your self-assessment had enough rigor that you're comfortable when that third party comes on site. If you don't, if you've never done these kinds of things before, you may want to engage somebody to do what they call a mock assessment before you engage with that third party. That has somebody come out who may also be a C3PAO. They do a mock assessment, then you engage with your, another C3PAO to actually do the assessment. There's also obviously a cost analysis that you also have to do if this makes sense. If you're just starting the process and you want to find out kind of where am I, that's when you really want to do a gap assessment. I'm just starting this procedure. I have a bunch of policies and procedures in place from other things. Let me gather all that. Let's do a review of what I currently have versus what's needed. And then that'll lay out a specific registry, if you will, of what I need to get done before I'm ready to engage with that next step, be that mock assessment or that third-party assessment. So number 5, are there any funding programs for small businesses as the cost to get CMMC certified and meets all quals is very high? There are some programs. It's typically done state by state. There are manufacturing programs. They're called MEPS programs that are part of each state typically. And there are a few I know of that have a program set aside to help small businesses in their state become CMMC certified. These are often tied to universities, but if you look up MEPS, I believe it's MEPPS, in your state, you should find, if you will, the office or the university that manages that overall program. So as I mentioned, you will be getting this slide deck. We've got a couple more questions, but just want to let you know, we are providing some additional information as well. This includes that URL to access Policy Pro and get that free trial. So just a few more questions. So phase 1 starts 11/10/25. Yep, that's 60 days after the CFR 48 was put in place, right? It went in place on 9/10/2025. So phase 1 will start 11/10. And then 1 year, right? That phased period, right? Phase 1 is a 12-month period where it's expected that it's going to be self-assessments. That's phase 1. Phase 2 is when those certified third-party assessments are going to be required for new CMMC level 2 contracts, and that will be 11/10/2026. So yes, you are correct. So how can we track or assess the cybersecurity posture of a vendor or supplier? So the easiest answer to this is actually to ask them. There are some standard forms out there available on the web. I know Exostar worked with a number of organizations via the NIST to create what's called a CCRA form, a cybersecurity common, forget what the R is, assessment. If you Google NIST CCRA, there is a freely available Excel form which has these questions. It's a 36 questionnaire on an Excel spreadsheet that you can send out your suppliers and gather basic information about their cybersecurity. It includes that question about CMMC and levels and all those kinds of things. So that is one way, but you really do just kind of have to go out and ask them. And this is a requirement because remember, if your vendors are subcontractors to you, and you're, as are required, to flow down your CMMC requirements from you to them, it's incumbent on you to assess the cybersecurity of your subcontractors. So last question. Policies differ across all the platforms I use with my clients. How can I be assured when we develop annually review, we are current or make these evergreen? So these are why in each of the policies and procedures you create, you should have as part of that policy that these things are reviewed on a periodic basis. So you should have a built-in review and either update or review and verify or validate that these things continue to be the same, because you may swap out technologies, you may swap out vendors for different things. And if you do that, you will have to tweak, change, etc., your policies and procedures that go around how that thing is now done. Now, it may not be policies that you change. You may still have the overall policy the same, but you may implement that policy differently based on the technology. But you should note that you should update then your implementation statements, your evidence, etc., to ensure that. That's why you need to treat CMMC more as a program than treat it as a one-time checklist that you're going to be doing once every 3 years. So everybody, I think that concludes today's session. I want to thank everybody for your time and attention. David, thanks so much for your presentation today as well. Joe and Joey, thanks for your help. Everyone have a great day and a great rest of the week.